China has this dream of overtaking the United States as the most influential global superpower, and their secret weapon in achieving this dream? Bridges. Lots of bridges, as well as ports and dams, and a long list of other infrastructure projects that are all a part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. Announced by Xi Jinping in 2013, the BRI intends to more efficiently connect 155 countries and improve international trade for over half the world's population, and all for just $8 trillion. In this video, we are going to answer the following questions. What is a world order, and why does China think a Silk Road reboot will change our existing one? What is the scope of the BRI, and how is it being financed? Is the BRI just another Silk Road, or is it entirely different? And finally, will the BRI allow China to successfully overtake the United States as the world's largest global power? A world order is essentially the rulebook that powerful countries use to keep peace and stability across the globe. When we talk about a new world order, we're discussing a shift in power where the current leading nations and their rules are swapped out for rising powers with different ideas. During this transition, the dominant powers form new institutions, establishing new guidelines from which international relations will develop. Right now, the United States is the chief rule maker of the world, thanks to the influence it's afforded by its economy, military, and technological advancements. But emerging powers like China have historically opposed the political and economic ground rules that the liberal West tries to establish for the rest of the world. It seems that China, rather than conform, is evolving into a revolutionary power that aims to re-establish new global norms and new institutions. And the reason China is hoping to achieve that through the BRI is because China plans to shape the world not by making the fastest fighter jets or the next metaverse, but by controlling global trade. For China, this is a major show of strength against the US, especially when you consider that most of China's international trade transits by sea go through the Malacca Strait near Singapore, a major ally to the US. The BRI aims to establish new trade routes, ones much more beneficial to China that aim to increase the global economy's dependency on China. As recently as 2021, Xi Jinping publicly criticized US global leadership and interference, stating that the rules set by one or several other countries should not be imposed on others, and the unilateralism of individual countries should not give the whole world a rhythm. But is that not the intention of the BRI? Much like the US's Marshall Plan of 1948 that provided economic aid to Europe to prevent the spread of communism, the BRI is an infrastructure project designed to expand the influence of one ideology and diminish the influence of another. But today, China, not Russia, will bring about the largest geopolitical change of this century. The era of Western political and economic domination is ending, and for the first time in modern history, the East and the West can coexist on equal terms, making it unclear whether the world is moving towards a unipolar, bipolar, or multipolar order. A bipolar order is a global structure dominated by two superpowers, where the majority of global influence is evenly split. The Cold War era, marked by the US and the Soviet Union, is perhaps the best example of this. In a multipolar order, the world isn't dominated by one or two ideologies, but several competing factions. Everybody has their considerable clout, but no one is dominating anyone. And in a unipolar world order, one country is the solo superpower calling the shots. Perhaps the best example is the world order that we're in today, where the US has been in the driver's seat since the end of the Cold War. I suppose only time and the comment sections will tell which of these three power structures the future may actually hold, but China's bid for world domination, interestingly enough, was actually a response to a major global disservice by the United States, the 2008 global financial crash. In response to their share of the financial turmoil, China rolled out a massive $650 billion stimulus package, majorly targeting infrastructure. While this helped China's domestic market in the short term, it soon left the market oversaturated with construction companies. This saturation paved the way for the BRI, offering Chinese firms opportunity on the international stage. In China, the BRI is actually the OBOR, the One Belt, One Road Initiative. Its official name was the Silk Road Economic Belt and 21st Century Maritime Silk Road Development Strategy, but not only is that a mouthful, the assertiveness of the word strategy didn't play well. It seemed too world domination-y and was rebranded to an initiative. It's like rebranding a shark as a friendly fish. So, what is in a name? Well, One Belt is shorthand for the Silk Road Economic Belt, a set of proposed roads and railways through the landlocked regions of Central Asia. You'd think the One Road part of the One Belt, One Road initiative would be about the roads, but actually, One Road refers to the 21st century maritime Silk Road, the Indo-Pacific sea routes from Southeast Asia to South Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. The crown jewel of the Belt component in China's Belt and Road Initiative is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. This 3,000-kilometer infrastructure network is designed to provide an alternative route to the Malacca Strait, allowing China to reroute its energy imports from the Middle East through Pakistan, and in doing so, enhancing its trade prospects with the energy-deficient Europe while protecting itself from the possibility of U.S. interference with trade going through the Malacca Strait. The CPEC is also a vital part of Pakistan's transformation from an agricultural economy to an industrial one, as it will bring the stable source of electricity the country so desperately needs. Pakistan's officials project that the CPEC will create 2.3 million jobs between 2015 and 2030 and add an additional 2.5% to the nation's annual GDP. As for the road half of China's BRI, and remember, the road half refers to the not road, water-based projects, China's strategy goes far beyond sidestepping the Malacca Strait. China's envisioning a global infrastructure grid that includes fuel stations, trade ports, and bridges spanning Sri Lanka, Dubai, Djibouti, Greece, Spain, and even Peru. The BRI actually encompasses over 2,600 infrastructure projects in over 100 countries, illustrating that the BRI is more of a broad economic vision than a crystallized plan. By 2027, China will have invested a staggering $1.3 trillion in the BRI, leading many economists and YouTubers alike to coin the BRI as the trillion-dollar sequel to the Silk Road. But actually, the BRI is hardly a new Silk Road, considering just how different and just how complicated it is. The most prominent difference between the Silk Road and the BRI is that one evolved naturally over time, while the other is a state-engineered strategy. Second, the BRI's scope is enormous. Its partners include over 155 countries, 30 of the world's largest financial institutions, and it engulfs 65% of the world's population and 40% of the world GDP. The Silk Road, in contrast, almost seems novel. The BRI aims to connect economies across continents, integrate commodity-rich nations into China's orbit, and elevate demand for the Chinese yuan as a global currency. It's not just about trading goods. It's about amassing geopolitical power. And that difference is the reason China's approach to financing the BRI differs from the traditional infrastructure financing we've seen from the IMF or the World Bank. While these international organizations typically set clear conditions for their aid and take a scrutinous approach to assessing the borrower's ability to repay the loans, China sidesteps these formalities and just offers a bunch of money for infrastructure. The strings are attached later, and boy, are there strings. As illustrated in our video on the UN's $50 billion oil for food scandal, even well-intentioned programs can face major operational challenges, especially corruption. In the case of the BRI, the secrecy surrounding the deals makes it hard to track who's managing the money and the projects. This lack of transparency has led to failures in the past. For instance, in Ecuador, a dam built by Chinese firms was found to have over 7,000 cracks and was located near an active volcano. Because the BRI is broken up into so many projects, it's difficult to gauge exactly how successful the BRI has been as a whole. But since its launch a decade ago, the BRI has undoubtedly faced periods of slowdown and various production challenges. To make things all the more complicated, BRI projects typically employ Chinese labor over local workforces, which creates several issues. When local individuals are not involved, there's a lack of local expertise to maintain and manage these projects. This practice can also generate resentment among communities as they see job opportunities given to non-local workers, exacerbating social tensions and hindering the perception of future BRI projects. So it seems China's generous piles of money certainly come with a host of intangible costs, as well as very real, very tangible costs, considering these obscenely large sums of money are not just investments in infrastructure, they're loans. And the thing about loans is you're gotta pay them back, but many of these countries simply can't afford to do that, creating what is called a debt trap. A debt trap is a situation where a borrower is forced to take on new loans simply to repay existing ones, getting trapped in a never-ending cycle of debt. China has in this context been accused of debt trap diplomacy, which describes an international financial relationship where a creditor, country, or institution exercises increased political leverage and control over a borrowing nation. Laos's debt to China is estimated at 45% of its GDP. Djibouti's debt to China is estimated at 70% of its GDP. Now, if this sounds unsustainable, it's because it is, but don't worry, China is always willing to refinance. When Sri Lanka had been borrowing billions from China to build a new trading port, it was struggling to repay its loans and the port was still far from completion. This led to the Sri Lankan government selling an 85% stake in the port to China, who issued another $1.15 billion for the project's completion upon receiving a 99-year lease to control the port, providing China more influence over a pivotal part of Asia, off the southern coast of India. This example of debt diplomacy raises an interesting question. If China controls Sri Lanka's second largest port for the next century, what does that say about Sri Lanka's sovereignty? In light of all of this, the West isn't just lying down without a fight. They know that disrespecting the sovereignty of developing economies was their thing from way back when. And so in June 2021, the White House announced that President Biden had met with G7 leaders to discuss strategic competition with China and commit to concrete actions to help fill the $40 trillion infrastructure gap in the developing world. They developed the B3W, or Build Back Better World, a values-driven infrastructure partnership led by major democracies. This announcement was meant to serve as a unified vision for global infrastructure development, a counter-jab to hinder China's bid for a new world order. But despite having some cool American sound bites about democracy and cooperation, this plan, surprisingly, has even less tangible details than the BRI. It has no budget, no timetable, and there's not even a clear indication of exactly who is going to be in charge. So, in some sense, the BRI has created yet another axis of competition between China and the West. But as the plot thickens, it's unclear if the US and China are racing to see who can save more of the world or who can control it through a little thing called neocolonialism. Neocolonialism refers to global powers perpetuating colonial forms of exploitation and control through the operations of international capitalism rather than by means of direct rule. So, from the perspective of developing countries, it may not really matter whether the money comes from China or the US. It's still money, and they could still use it to their advantage. The World Bank estimates that the BRI alone could pull 7 million people out of extreme poverty and boost global trade by as much as 6.5%. But China isn't only aligning with some of the world's poorest countries, it's also aligning strategically with the US's allies and rivals. China has now become Saudi Arabia's largest trade partner, and all amidst a weakening relationship between Saudi and the United States. In Saudi Arabia, the BRI is positioned to align with the country's massive Vision 2030 initiative, as China and Saudi are joining forces to finance the construction of mega projects and bolster their existing energy trade. China's BRI has also substantially shaped their trade relations with Russia, which have only increased in the aftermath of the war in Ukraine. In the last year, China's imports from Russia, including discounted oil, coal, and metals, has risen by 16%, while China's exports to Russia have increased by 91%. Despite rumors that China's BRI investments in Russia slowed down after Ukraine's invasion, China actually invested nearly $2 billion into Russian construction projects in 2022. So although some of China's projects in Russia aren't officially labeled as BRI investments, that's just a matter of labeling. In practice, these investments serve the same goals as the BRI initiatives. So while it's undeniable that China's BRI is certainly ambitious and vast, that doesn't mean it's immune to flaws and challenges, which we haven't really discussed, as China has been fueling the development of the BRI on a true double-edged sword: bad debt. Today, China is the largest lender in the world, and it's not even close. In total, the Chinese state and its subsidiaries have lent out about $1.5 trillion in direct loans and trade credits to more than 150 countries around the globe. This has turned China into the world's largest official creditor by a mile, surpassing the values issued out by both the World Bank and IMF combined. In fact, outstanding debt to China now exceeds more than 5% of the global GDP. The fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, however, has left China and many other indebted BRI partners battling a host of context-specific economic headaches, leaving more and more of these countries unable to pay China's loans. According to a recent study, since 2013, China has had to bail out 20 countries by essentially delaying or restructuring $230 billion worth of loans. This happens through one of two methods. The first is China just gives them more money. The second method is through swap lines, where Chinese central banks tell other countries' central banks that they can convert as much of their local currency into Chinese yuan. For instance, China has a swap line with Argentina, who in the past 8 years has had to use the swap line 8 times, bolstering its foreign reserves by converting a whole load of pesos into Chinese yuan. These foreign reserves help Argentina more easily pay off international creditors by converting yuan to US dollars. But is this economically viable for China? China has set up swap lines with 40 countries to promote the use of the Chinese yuan in international trade, but this has only been used by countries struggling to pay back the loans. The number of financial bailouts has increased exponentially during COVID, going from $1 billion in 2011 to $40 billion in 2021. The implications of this mean that a quarter of China's BRI loans have been defaulted on and required restructuring. Now, while a part of this can be blamed on the COVID-related global slowdown, there's also an argument to be made that the Chinese government has acted recklessly with the issuing of these loans. Just look at its $1 billion loan to Montenegro to build a road that's going nowhere, I guess, considering the development of the project is far from finished and riddled with corruption allegations. Sri Lanka similarly borrowed billions to build the Lotus Tower, a vanity project that isn't expected to generate substantial revenue streams for the country. It seems piling on more debt can certainly be a one-way ticket through financial quicksand, as we've seen in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Zambia, as well as several other countries who all ran to the IMF when they were unable to pay their loans to China. But perhaps if you're China, a bit of bad debt is a small inconvenience when you have your mind on world domination. But in the absence of establishing a new world order, all this bad debt must certainly be a concern for China's financial future. As Michael always says on EE, no one can predict the future, least of all economists, and that certainly holds true in a world where the risk analysis of China's loans have completely changed for the worse in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, COVID or no COVID, the BRI, for the reasons we'll outline in the last chapter of this video, ultimately is not going to be enough to put forward a new world order. The Belt and Road Initiative may boost China's economic influence, but it falls short of positioning China to create a new world order for several reasons. The first has to do with the military reach of China and the US. The United States maintains global dominance with an extensive network of military bases and superior technology. In 2022 alone, the US invested $877 billion in its military, more than 3 times China's budget of $292 billion. The American market benefits greatly from global investors who find comfort in the transparency and predictable nature of the American legal system. In contrast, China's markets are often subject to auditing scandals, which typically evoke skepticism from international investors. Political unrest in China creates further fears as well. And to further complicate things, all of China's bad BRI debt also has the potential to jeopardize their financial stability. The US economy is also much more diversified than that of China's, boasting a mix of services, manufacturing, and technology companies that together paint the picture of a resilient, multifaceted economy. Meanwhile, China's manufacturing-reliant economy exposes it to demand-driven risks. Additionally, the US is a magnet for global talent and investment due to its innovative edge and strong intellectual property rights. In contrast, China's reputation for IP infringement deters foreign collaboration. But perhaps the greatest testament to the economic might of the US is the United States dollar's unrivaled position as the world's reserve currency. While the Chinese yuan doesn't share this global trust, Part of the BRI's vision is to make the Chinese yuan a more regularly circulating global currency. In recent years, China has made tremendous progress in institutionalizing the yuan more in international trade, as well as convincing BRICS allies to follow its lead as it continues to offload U.S. Treasury bonds. Despite this, though, the U.S. dollar is still very strong, and some would argue that it's only going to get stronger, in no small part due to how much conflict is going on in the world right now. While the BRI may be a significant stride towards greater global influence for China, it doesn't spell a seismic shift in the world order. The US, at least for now, retains its advantageous position through military superiority, economic robustness, a culture of innovation, and the global relevance of the US dollar. For China, transcending these multifaceted challenges requires more than infrastructural investment. It necessitates fundamental transformations within and beyond its borders.